Hello, welcome to Dyslexia Explored. I'm Darius Namdaran, your host, and today we've got a fascinating character I want to introduce you to, involved in the tech world, business to business enterprises, venture investments. And we'll get into all the stuff that he does, but we're going to explore the world and the dyslexia story of Edward Keelan. Edward, it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
So the reason I kind of wanted to get you on is from the sort of business world, the tech world, you spend so much time with entrepreneurs and business builders and so on, and you've got dyslexia yourself. Could you tell us a little bit about where you're at and what you do right now? And then we'll sort of rewind to hear the story.
Sure. So I'm a partner at a venture capital firm, which is called Octopus Ventures. So it's part of the Octopus Group. So Octopus Group, probably most people know the Octopus Group due to it being an energy company. So we've got the Octopus Energy Company, which is down one side, which is now the largest electricity company in the UK. I thought it was a terrible idea and it'd never work. So there you go. They ignored me and did it anyway, and transpires it was a great idea. And then down the other side of it is the investment arm, so Octopus Investments. And I work within that arm, as I said, I'm a partner within the ventures area of that. And what does ventures mean? It means I invest into early stage companies. So I'm investing into companies that are not quite startup, but just a little bit more, maybe got £1 million, £2 million worth of revenue. And my role is to sort of help look after the team, sit on the investment committee, make investment decisions, sit on the boards of the portfolio companies. So I do a lot of work with companies we've invested into, kind of sitting on the board and trying to give them direction and hopefully making a return at some point and things go up. And yeah, that's kind of my job. I've been at Octopus now for 15 years in total. And Octopus is a great company. We're a B Corp. So we're kind of trying to invest in the ideas and industries, people that are going to change the world for the better. So there's kind of an underlying theme. We're not an impact fund, but there's an underlying theme of trying to do the right thing by the use of the capital. And so far, it's been a great journey over the last 15 years and I've loved it. And yeah, that's where I find myself today.
So we're the Dyslexia Explored podcast. So I'd like to just explore your dyslexia journey. And one of the things I'm fascinated by is, what was life like before you were aware of dyslexia, and what woke you up to dyslexia?
I mean, I was diagnosed really early, which, for somebody in their 40s now, early 40s, is actually quite unusual because, I was most definitely the only dyslexic at school, as I remember, in my primary school of about 450 people. When I say I was the only one identified. There's probably tons of dyslexics, but I was the only one that had been identified. State primary school, came from an amazing family, but not hugely wealthy. And so, yeah, I was diagnosed probably, I don't exactly know the exact date, it was probably around about the age of 8 or 9, I would say, around about then. And it's quite an interesting journey. I mean, you don't, as an 8 or 9-year-old, I don't think you really understand that you're struggling. I don't think 9-year-olds kind of look at the world and go, or 8-year-olds look at the world and go, oh, I'm really struggling. I wonder if there's a neurodiverse issue here that I need to overcome. They just carry on with their lives. For me, what I knew was that, my mates were all doing well, and there was kind of some huts outside of our school. So if you imagine like classic state primary school, and then in the fields, there's some like dilapidated wooden huts that you send all the naughty children to get them out of the classroom. Well, it was the naughty children plus me, because they didn't really know what to do with me. And I've seen some of my writing. My mum's actually kept some of my work from when I was sort of 8, 9 years old. And, it's hilarious. I do laugh at my dyslexia, so apologies for any offense caused, but, there's a paragraph of work, I think it's about 30 words long, where 15 of the words are spelt incorrectly. And, the teacher's comment underneath is, must use a dictionary to look up words, which is, for a dyslexic, is about as helpful as telling them to, I don't know, apply for Mensa or whatever. And the truth is half the words were spelt with the wrong first letter. So I'm not sure what a dictionary would have even done to help. And obviously this is long before internet and computer spelling checks and all this. So yeah, they didn't really know what to do with me. They put me in the wooden huts. My friends were all learning about dinosaurs and volcanoes. I was doing the whole look at a word, cover it up, try and repeat it. Didn't work, still couldn't spell. And in the end, my mum actually came in, and she's kind of like a powerful Yorkshire woman. that you don't really mess with too much. And she came in and was like, get him back in the classroom. He's not stupid. He's not naughty. There's no reason for him to be doing this, and basically knocked heads together. And again, yeah, did I really understand what was going on? Not really. I don't think so. And then I was taken to the Dyslexic Association. My mum had read an article about dyslexia. I mean, it wasn't the school that said, he might be dyslexic, you should do this. It was, my mum had read an article. She took me to Winchester, where there was the Dyslexic Association, to do an assessment. And they would say, and kind of, this is a bit that I sort of remember. I remember that I had a maths age of a 13-year-old and a spelling age that wasn't, and a spelling and reading age that wasn't actually, they couldn't find it. Like it was so low, I was sort of almost before schooling. It was, certainly not into the key stage 2 schooling. So there was clearly something wrong here. And also that I could explain things. I remember them saying he's actually really eloquent, and for a kid of his age, the ability to kind of verbalize what he's saying. And so they were like, yeah, he is huge dyslexia. It's like all the alarm bells for dyslexia. And again, this is in time where I guess probably the boundaries of dyslexia are probably much narrower as well. And again, I don't blame the school. In a twist of fate, I'm now a governor at the school that put me in the huts outside. So who's laughing now? And yeah, I don't blame the school. They just weren't set up for it. It just wasn't that known. So, but my mum continued to bang doors, and this happened to be, goodness knows how lucky this was or what would have happened otherwise, but there happened to be a dyslexic teacher, so a specialist that lived on our street. And so mum and dad didn't have a huge amount of money at the time. And so I think my grandparents paid for me to have this additional sessions with the dyslexic tutor. And I did that for about 3.5, 4 years. So all the way up until about the second year of secondary school. So it was probably 12 at the time. And like, my dyslexia is still pretty severe. Even today, it's quite comical. But that gave me enough of a foundation. It gave me enough of a foundation to enable me to go through schooling. But it would happen continuously. And it was, in secondary school, it was really used against me, I would say. And the teachers needed to put people into sets. How, I don't know if you had the same thing, but you have like 1 to 5 sets, and they'd be like, dyslexic, he can go in set 5, so that, we've got a rationale for that. And so my mum would have to come back into the school. He's not going in set 5, because the trouble is, if you go in set 5, you can't then do your GCSEs. To get the C's you need at GCSEs, you have to do the lower papers, and then you can't do your A-levels, and you can't get a degree. And you're 12 years, 13 years old, and the system's already decided that you're not going to be academic. You're going to have to do something else, bracket. And I have so much respect for my parents and my mum during that, because had she not made that fight in those early stages, the story would be different. I don't know what the story would have been, because there's no counterfactual, but the story would have been different. And for a lot of children, they don't have that,
Yeah.
They don't, and I don't blame anybody that. My mum's quite an unusual character in that that's kind of who she is. She doesn't really care what people say. She'll just kick the doors down. Whereas for other people, they'd probably listen to the schools. And I've got friends, actually, one of my best friends, who very much went the other way, where he was clearly dyslexic, but his parents decided actually they weren't going to fight in the same way as my mum had done. And that ended up in a different path for him. So, that was kind of my early memories. I remember writing a letter to like a friend or something that had moved away, and trying to tell them that I was dyslexic, but not being able to spell the word dyslexic, thinking what a ridiculous word, like of all the words to come up with for somebody that struggles with spelling. And I remember that would have still been at primary school, so probably about the age of 10 or 11. So I guess I was quite cognizant of it from then.
How many years did it take you to learn how to spell the word dyslexia? Took me, I think, 2 to 3 years to learn how to spell dyslexia.
Oh yeah, I still get it wrong now. I don't know if I've learned the word dyslexia. It's got a Y in it somewhere. There's no, I've written it a lot over recent years, but yeah, the honest truth is, with a lot of spelling, I just kind of, we're in a wonderful world now where spelling is not so important. And if you're not sure if that's the right spelling of a word, you can use Google to kind of make sure that the definition of it is right and you're using it properly. And the spell checks are so much more accurate. I don't know why Google is so much better at spell checking than word processors. That still puzzles me, but it just means that there are those tools out there. So I don't really worry about spelling too much, because I know that if I take my time, I can actually change all the words to what they need to be. I think one of the problems with dyslexia, and certainly something I fell foul of, was that because I was dyslexic, you have a badge, and this badge is over your head, and you have it for a very early age. So I've been failing at school anyway. And then somebody says, oh, the reason why you're failing at school is because you're dyslexic. So you've got this badge tattooed on your forehead. And then so you say, well, I must be terrible at writing. My written work must be terrible. My ability to read and understand must be really bad, because that's what I'm being told is a dyslexic. And actually, it's only I don't know, if people go onto my LinkedIn, they'll know that I write a lot of blogs. I write a lot of stuff. I've learned now how to write. And I learned in a way that works, partly through my work and partly just because I sort of decided, I don't know, subconsciously, that maybe just being dyslexic doesn't mean to say I can't write, that I can't form strong sentences and this. So I think in the early stages, things like not being able to spell the word dyslexic immediately put me on this train of thought of, oh, that must mean I'm crap at all these other things.
Yeah.
And it isn't necessarily true.
I'd like to explore, what is your writing process? How do you write a blog?
How do I write my blog? So probably the one that's most relevant for this podcast, and I mean, how my whole dyslexia being more public kind of came about, was that I wrote a blog around my journey with dyslexia, put a blog together, didn't think anything much of it. And then that kind of, for whatever reason, hit a nerve with quite a lot of people with dyslexia, or people that knew me that had no idea that I was dyslexic, and kind of spiraled. And so that blog was kind of a seminal moment when I just went, you know what, I'm just going to write this blog, and I'm just going to put it out there without anyone editing it for me. So no friends editing it. It's going to have spelling mistakes. It's going to be grammatically wrong. But I found a style where, so what do I think the biggest, this sounds so simple, Darius, it sounds so simple, short sentences.
Right.
One of my old bosses, a chap called Tim Senior, who now unfortunately has passed away, but was a real mentor to me. He looked at my work and said to me, why do you have such long sentences with loads of commas?
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't know what grammar is. The way that I've learned grammar just doesn't really make sense to me. And he sort of worked with me on, we'll just make that sentence much shorter, that sentence much shorter. It sounds really simple, doesn't it? And I don't know if I'm oversimplifying it. I mean, probably experience. And I found that actually, if I just shortened all my sentences, and then because they were shorter, I could then construct paragraphs more coherently, I think.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Because if you have a short sentence, then if that doesn't quite work there, I'll push it here. But when you have very long sentences and blocks of text, it becomes really, really difficult to then reconstruct those sentences. So it sounds ridiculously overly simplified, and I'm sure it is. But actually, it's probably not a good, if you are struggling with your writing, probably a really good place to start, which is just half every sentence, and use more paragraphs, and try not to use too many commas, because it's not necessary, and you'll probably find you'd get better. I mean that, and my work requires me to write long investment papers, so I just did an awful lot of writing.
Yes. It's a bit like, it makes me think of Lego. You could have very big Lego blocks, sentences, or small ones. And it's often easier to build things with small elements, and you've got more flexibility and so on, on big ones that don't quite fit and go over the edge and so on.
It's much easier to read as well, small sentences as well. It just makes the whole thing more palatable.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
do you use speech to text or anything like that? Do you talk it out and then go through it and clean it up, or do you go straight onto the keyboard and start typing?
Yeah, I'm straight onto the keyboard, actually. And I think dyslexia presents itself in so many different ways. Like my reading's always been strong, even when I was first diagnosed. Not strong compared to somebody without dyslexia, but like it was never an issue. So my biggest issues for my dyslexia, I say, certainly around spelling and memory recall, and the way things get muddled up in my head on memory recall, take time to process things. But actually, a lot of the kind of classic, they find it hard to write. It might just be, in all fairness, you just never know what's the reason, but it might just be because I've had to do an awful lot of writing that come more second nature to me.
Yes.
But I always found that speech to text more difficult, because the speech to text, as you can tell, anyone listening to this can tell, I ramble a lot. I don't talk in short sentences. And therefore, speech to text always just made a big blob on my screen. Do you know what I mean? It was almost incoherent. So that didn't work for me. And again, I do think we have to be really, really careful with dyslexia not putting all dyslexics in the same box, because dyslexia will present itself for different people in very different ways, and there'll be things you're good at. Like, I remember when I first got diagnosed with dyslexia, it was right when, everyone had decided the way to combat dyslexia was to put like a blue annotate across your work or a pink annotate across your work. It made zero difference for me. I'm still to this day got no idea what it was meant to have done, but for some people, clearly must have worked. I don't know, but for me, it was, and so I just think we have to be really careful on that. And speech text was just one of those things that I just found made it more cumbersome than anything else.
So, that overlay is Erin Syndrome. Have you heard of Erin Syndrome?
That's a new one to me.
It co-occurs with dyslexia for quite a few people. And so the letters jiggling up and down, you put these overlays on and it reduces the contrast between the black and the white, and then the jiggling stops and the letters stay still. So, and people can have that without having dyslexia as well. So it's kind of do letters jiggle for you, by the way?
Not particularly, no.
No, nor for me. And that's one of the reasons why I put off investigating dyslexia, because I made this assumption, well, people with dyslexia, the letters jiggle up and down when they're reading, and that doesn't happen for me. So I can't be dyslexic. And it's part of that pigeonholing of this is dyslexia, this isn't, and realizing there's a lot more to it than just simplistic letters bouncing is dyslexia.
Yeah, definitely.
This podcast is sponsored by DyslexiaProductivityCoaching.com, which helps you organize yourself creatively with a productivity system for Apple devices. So what would you say was your biggest challenge in high school that came from dyslexia?
I mean, obviously spelling, and back then, my biggest, high school, or as it's called secondary school in England, was actually probably a really unhappy time for me generally. I think that a bit of an identity crisis. I was a bit old, had probably a bit of an old soul before my time. And the biggest challenge, I think, was that I'd struggled a lot at primary school, but people were still my friend and it wasn't a big deal. And you get to secondary school and all of a sudden you're graded into classes and it becomes much more apparent of where you are and what you're struggling with, what you're not. And I think the biggest problem was I felt like there was a huge disconnect between, in some regards, the intelligence I felt that I had versus how I was doing. And it's a bad situation, because if you feel like you're maybe a little bit smarter than, the fact that you're getting E's and D's and failing exams, I'm not talking like I thought that I was some sort of going to Oxbridge type genius, but I mean, just like I wasn't in the bottom 10% of the school, I was somewhere in the middle. If you feel like that getting over that mental hurdle is pretty draining, for a young person to try and deal with that. And, there's no doubt again that my mum hadn't gone into the school, that they would have put me into sets that wouldn't have even allowed me to do the exams to move forward with academia. And the biggest problem for me with schooling, and especially at that sort of age, is it's all about how well you can regurgitate what you've been told. Yeah. It's like, here is a question, now I want you to regurgitate what you've been told. And the problem that I have with it is that for me, I don't do well at regurgitation of information that I don't fully understand. Yeah. So I need to understand something to the point I can almost teach it. And I want to have the debate. And actually in the debate, I'll be able to form coherent arguments and explore new areas. Trying to get that down on paper, I find very, very difficult. And the understanding, what somebody means by a question, I found really difficult. So you'd see a question and you'd think it was meant to be answered in one way, but the teacher or whoever set the set the question would actually meant it to be answered in a completely different way. But, if we're having a conversation, we can explore that and we can talk about it, and we can't do any of that at school. It's like, no, here's a question. You've got to give me the answer. If it's the wrong answer, it's not the way that I want it answered, then it's tough luck. Well, for a dyslexic, that's a nightmare, because our brains go all over the place and we don't really know what you're asking. And that, coupled with the fact that you're then meant to answer questions in this certain way and interpret what somebody's saying from the written word, and then add in all the facts that you're meant to have remembered, all the dates, all the people's names, I love English history. I'm pretty good at it. I can't remember any of the names of the people or when they. I remember the rough order of like English history. I can participate in. But if somebody said, I don't know who was the king in X Y Z, I'd be like, I kind of know the era, but that. And so school is really hard for dyslexics because it's just
Yeah.
the way in which is sort of what is good is really it is very different to where the dyslexic brain works. So just to illustrate this a little bit further, I would be struggling in English class. I'd be getting poor grades. Luckily, I had a good teacher, which was Mrs. Oakes, who was great, and she was on my side. Had I had another teacher, probably different. But I was still struggling. I was still just barely scraping a C in order to get to my A levels. But I was also the head of the debating committee that I formed, that I created, that I started. That like say, in one sense, you've got this kid that's like completely struggling and can't get more than a C in English if he really pushes himself with extra tuition, but also has the mind to start a debating committee, to start a topic for that debating committee, to form the groups in the debating committee, to organize the teachers in the classrooms, to be there and judge. And do you know what I mean? That's like,
Yes.
How does that make sense? How can you have a kid that can have the vision to create a debating committee at a state secondary school?
Yes.
And also one that can't pass his English GCSE.
Now I'm feeling really bad because I'm not remembering a name either right now, but we had another venture capitalist on the program, and I'm going to remember the name later on. We'll put it in the show notes. And what was fascinating from that discussion was to explore the strengths that you used within school to balance the challenges. So like what I'm wondering is, you said, I was very lucky I had this English teacher. I was very lucky with my mum. I was very lucky. Now, what I'm going to guess is there was maybe something else that assisted that luck. And it's maybe around the realm of interpersonal skills, the humility to ask for help, to discuss, I don't know. Could you talk a little bit about maybe some of the ways that you navigated those challenges at school and how you used other strengths?
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, like 50% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic because schooling doesn't work for them, and therefore they create their own businesses because they can visualize what needs to be. And luckily, the scorecard of business is actually how much money you make and how well the business does. It's not being marked by a third party to how well you formed a sentence. But also, like, I think it's just under half of prisoners are dyslexic.
Yeah.
So, I'll stand by my fact that I think I was lucky, and I think there's a lot of people out there with dyslexia who, if they don't have that support from the right people early on, will go the other way. And that's shown by the levels of dyslexics in the prison population. So that's why I say I'm lucky, because, and I imagine the frustration that would be built if you felt, like I said, like I'm failing, I'm like the bottom 10% academically, but yet I don't feel stupid. That frustration, you could have doubled down on that had I not had the support. I mean, I think having failed early in my life and being constantly told that I can't spell, that I can't do this, that I can't remember my multiplication tables, that I can't, all of these sorts of things, that I've never been afraid of failure. I basically failed from a really young age at everything, and that gives you a really strong resilience to keep going. So I think that's probably something, but also, a bit like your career path that we were talking about early, where you sort of visualize what the next step might be, and then if that doesn't work, you can quickly change path, and you visualize the next step, and then you change path, and you visualize the next step, and that's what dyslexics are really good at. I could always see the next best thing. I can always see the next best thing that might be the right thing to do, and I'm not, because of that resilience, I'm not afraid to try it.
So you're in high school. What was the next best thing you saw when you were in high school, in secondary school?
Well, I mean, fundamentally at secondary school, you have to get your GCSEs, which are the base level exams. So, I mean, there is no next best thing. Had I have failed my GCSEs, the next best thing would have retaken them at college and had to do them again. So, I mean, that's sort of a point in time where you have no option. I mean, ultimately, my parents were both entrepreneurs. My dad's quite heavily dyslexic as well. And I think I'd been growing up around small business. That's why I love entrepreneurship and I love entrepreneurs and I love the energy and I just love the idea of like, you come up with an idea. We're at the pub, me and you, and we're sitting with a napkin and we're writing a few ideas on. And then before you know it, this napkin is no longer a napkin. It's like a living, breathing organism that's employing people, and people are getting together because they're there, because they're getting married. There's people making money, people losing money. There's, services that are being added. There's like, before you know, you're in office blocks and I just think there's not much in the world. I mean, there is a lot in the world that grows, organically, but there's not a much that you can do where you can truly create something from a napkin and turn it into something bigger that's got a kind of life of its, that becomes and has a life of its own. So I think I'd always said the next best thing, if this all fails, I'll just become an entrepreneur. I'll just do entrepreneurial things. And, from a very early age, I had, had a car washing business, and with my mates, I had, all sorts of little enterprises around the house. And so I think I was always ready to just like switch on the entrepreneurship gene, had that the schooling not worked out. In fact, my mum and dad are pretty, especially my dad, mum probably less so, but my dad is pretty disappointed that I didn't end up being an entrepreneur and going down that route.
Disappointed? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, he would have liked to see me be be somebody like yourself and actually try and create something from nothing and do all that.
But are you not doing that by investing in others and being part of that process?
Oh, 100%. I've got the kind of cheeky route where I've got all the, you get the security of not having to do it yourself, but with all the, with the enjoyment of working with entrepreneurs who are kind of exciting people that you can kind of live vicariously through. And my wife's got her own small business now. And, I like to lean into that because I find that really exciting. She's so what she's doing, and I can build her website and I can sort her Instagram marketing out. And, so I'm kind of that little bit of dyslexia that in me that wants to visualize things and see how things can be and all the rest of it. I can just kind of vicariously live through my wife and through the entrepreneurs that I back.
What does she do?
She's actually a top private chef. So she's been a private chef for some, I probably should name the people that she's been a private chef for, but like, bands and movie stars and very high net worth individuals. She's about to cook for a very famous dyslexic, and and recently she started up kind of high-end supper clubs. So where people come and there's like 14 covers, but she does 10-course taster menus. And then we've just bought a little property in the middle of our little town. So we live in the smallest town in Hampshire. So we just bought a little property in the middle of town, which is going to become where her supper clubs are hosted and where she'll work from and things. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
Martina-app.com. If anyone's into eating, Martina-app.com.
In the show notes below.
Yeah, because I wrote the website, so the spelling is dreadful.
So tell us more about the entrepreneurial enterprises you did in childhood. What was your earliest? Did your parents? Oh, tell me about your parents as well. What kind of work did they do?
So they met at Clothing Manufacturing College in Manchester. That's where they got together. And, my dad I think my dad wowed my mum by suggesting he was going to be a millionaire by the time he was 30. And, unfortunately, he decided he was going to do that by being in clothing manufacturing in the UK during the 70s. So just as the entire clothing industry was falling apart, that's when my dad decided he would be the person to make his millions. And ultimately, he had a choice, which was, do I take my family and everybody out to Malaysia or China or, where clothing had moved to, or do I have a complete about turn of profession? And he decided that actually he didn't want to take his whole family out. The family was more important to him than continue to try and make his millions. So he then, bless him, he had to basically scrap the career that he'd spent 2 decades building, and he became like a door-to-door insurance salesman, like literally knocking on doors, trying to sell people life insurance, pretty brutal job. Really brutal job. But he's also, although dyslexic, he's academically very curious. And so he did all the exams. So whilst he was doing that, he just did exam after exam after exam and actually became a chartered wealth planner. And so by the time he retired, he'd built his own little wealth management business. So he'd started door to door. I mean, it's quite a journey from door to door, knocking on people's doors, trying to sell insurance, all the way to becoming a chartered financial planner, to uber high net worths, and, you know, building his own little business, which he retired from last year.
Yeah.
An incredible journey, you know. And I used to do his at age 12, well, probably a bit older actually, age sort of 15, 16, I was doing his cash flows. You know, I was putting his accounts together and all this sort of thing, which was, you know, at the time felt whatever. But now I'm like looking back and wow, what training, like what to be brought up in that environment, to really understand what it means to be entrepreneurial.
So you're
And then,
struggling at school, and then you're doing your dad's cash flow projections for his business.
yeah, I had this, I don't know if you have this as well, but I had this really weird thing where I would do a lot of kind of, I say, we didn't have a huge amount of money growing up. So I would do a lot of kind of part-time work, and I'd be failing at school. But when I went and did part-time work, whether that be at the golf course, working as a greenkeeper, or in the bars at the local pub, washing up or whatever, I do really well. You know, people would be like, oh, you've got a lot of initiative, you know, you're coming up with new ideas, you're changing the way we do things here. That's more. And so I was like, this is really weird. I really remember thinking, I'm good at work. It's like, I'm good at doing a job, which is bizarre. You know, because you think school and jobs should kind of mirror each other in how good you are at them, but they don't. I was really good at jobs and really bad at school. It's like bizarre.
Do you find, when I was in sixth year, okay, I ended up doing this not bar job. I worked as a dishwasher in a local bar. Okay.
Yeah.
And what happened was I ended up figuring out how the whole system in the bar worked. And then someone said, do you want to help me keep stock? And then, do you want to help me with this? And do you want to help me with that? And I just asked so many questions all the time until I ended up being behind the bar. I was underage. I was 17 years old in one of the coolest bars in Glasgow, Bar Luxembourg. And in the middle of the night, I'm serving at this bar. They didn't ask my age because I looked like I was older. And someone from my school was 6 people deep into the bar. You know, they're all waiting. So cool, bar people. And I've got the Bar Luxembourg t-shirt on. And suddenly I was the cool kid. And I was, from being square at school, I suddenly was like wearing the Bar Luxembourg cool. And they're standing there looking at me going, Darius, what? How? Why? How? You know? Did you find that? Because you mentioned you felt like a bit, you know, misfit in school, you know, this gap. Did something happen in the work environment where you kind of felt, you know, not just you could do the work, but something happened inside of you in terms of your awareness of yourself, or how you looked at yourself and so on, you know, confidence, etc.?
I don't know. I was definitely never cool at school, that's for sure. No one would tarnish me with that. Yeah, I mean, back to your earlier question in terms of like your entrepreneurial journey, like I remember at the age of 7 coming up with, I created my own football supporters club. You know, I remember not even, maybe I was like 6 or 7, like literally really young age. I remember this is probably one of my earliest memories, going into school and charging everybody 50p to join my, or maybe 20p at those times, but like you're charging a small amount of money to join my football club, supporters club. And if you join my football supporters club, you got special tokens, and it's like 6 years old. It's like just nuts. And then, you know, going to primary school and creating a kind of my own conker tournament.
Brilliant.
You know, so like everyone had to sign up, and like I had a whole team of people collecting 50p's from all the other students. We were raising money for the RSPCA or something, and we had a whole like leaderboard of conker tournaments and all this sort of thing. I think that actually went really wrong because, you know, the games never happened and we just took everyone's money. But anyway, but you just, in my mind, I even at the age of sort of 8, 9 years old, I've been visualizing like how a conker tournament could work, how we would market that conker tournament, how we would get people to sign up, and people did sign up. You know, probably raised a £5 in total or something. And then I think through school, as I said, we had like a little car washing business, but I did a lot of did a lot of part-time jobs. But I think I look back on my school years, and I just was a bit of a fish out of water. And I think mainly I was very sensitive. Like I'm, you know, probably still a bit sensitive now, but much less so. And I think you know, who's cool at school? You know, first of all, you're going through puberty. So all of a sudden girls exist in a way that they didn't exist before. And, you know, I fell in love with everybody and had nobody fall in love with me. So that was naturally a problem. And the people that are cool are the ones that don't care, and the ones that don't take life seriously, and the ones that are a little bit mischief, and the funny ones. And I was the entire opposite. Like I was like I think I'm, you know, I'm more like Benjamin. I'm much sillier now and much more chilled and relaxed now than I was at school. You know, so I was like a really old soul. And being an old soul when you're like 15 years old is like the worst thing to be, because actually it's all about fun, taking the mick out of each other, not caring what people think. So I just really struggled. And it was when I got to college at the age of 16. I think, you know, we went to Queen Mary's College in Basingstoke, again, like state college, just your bog standard sixth form college. And I got a new haircut, went in maybe with a slightly different attitude, but also I could reinvent myself a little bit. And also you got rid of, you know, sixth form college, it was the people that were doing A levels. So, you know, I'd made it, I'd got through that really hard part of my life. And for those 2 years, got my first girlfriend who was, you know, lovely and attractive. And all of a sudden that gave me the confidence, I think, to push forward. So I did actually all right in my A levels, much better than anybody expected, way better than everyone expected. And I think that school was just, I found, you know, my being oversensitive and being a bit serious and all that, that's where I really, really struggled with it.
And where did you go to uni?
So I said I got all right A levels, but nobody really expected it. And I hadn't kind of anticipated going to any like red brick universities or anything like that. But I went to somewhere called Hartford Business School, which was this beautiful old mansion house in Hartford, up in Hertfordshire. And which was really good because I used to, you know, if you said it really quick, it sounded like you went to Harvard Business School.
Oh,
So my grandfather would go around telling everybody I went to Harvard Business School, and I was like, no, it's Hartford Business School. It's a very different place. No, I would never correct him. And I went to Hartford Business School, beautiful old mansion house, really nice grounds, great people there. It's not been knocked down now. It got knocked down the year I left, unfortunately, and it's like all merged in with the University of Hertfordshire. So, you know, strictly speaking, I was at the University of Hertfordshire, but I never actually went to the University of Hertfordshire. I went to the business school that was attached to it. And it was, you know, it was great. And I enjoyed it there. But I think by the time I got to university, I was really starting to understand my dyslexia. I was really starting to understand what it meant to be dyslexic. And I just got I got amazing friends, you know, amazing, like my friend Amy and my friend Lil and my housemate Dan, and it's just like people who really supported me and made it such a warm and lovely place to be. And that then helped me flourish more academically. I think if I look back at school, I think I'd tarnished myself with the brush of being thick and dyslexic because that's what everyone told me I was. So I never tried because I shouldn't try because I'm never going to achieve anything anyway. And then I got to university, and by then I felt a bit happier in myself, and that then led on to me being more academically bright. And then at university, it then came down to, I did a placement year in San Francisco. So my cousin Kieran, who I'm really close to, he was like, you know, you should go to, I always wanted to go to America. My dad had gone to America when he was at university, so I wanted to go to America. My cousin Kieran, who's, you know, again, been a massive support in my life, he said, well, you should go to San Francisco because it's the most awesome city. And my friend Pete lives there. Pete's quite a bit older than me, but like as soon as I landed in San Francisco, so I did manage to find work there. Classic dyslexic. Everybody else is going to, you know, round London or whatever. I've written to every company I can find in San Francisco to try and find a placement year. And a big turning point was, so Pete's probably one of the cleverest people I know, if not the cleverest person I know. I mean, he went to Cambridge. He did his postdoc at Stanford. He's like mega super brain. He's the exact opposite to me. Remembers everything. Picks up languages instantly. Yeah. We're walking along the beach one day in San Francisco, and Pete's just like, so what do you hope to get in your degree? And I was like, well, I hope to scrape a 2-1 and that will, you know, help me progress. And Pete's like, why would you go for a 2-1? I'm like, well, I'm dyslexic and, you know, it's hard for me to do better than sort of just getting by because I'd always kind of scrape. And Pete's like, you know, that's ridiculous. You're way smarter than a lot of people that I went to university with. You know, you just have to work harder and to get through the dyslexia thing. And it was really weird. It was such a, you know, it chokes me now because I can absolutely remember that moment walking along Ocean Beach in San Francisco, California with Pete, and him having this conversation with me. And I mean, it was a bit of a kick up the arse in one sense. But the other sense, it was somebody who I deeply respected saying, well, I think you can do more than just get by. I think you can get a first. And nobody had done that before. You know, no, like even my mum and dad, who are amazing, you know, they've been hammered by teachers telling them that I was never going to go to university. I was never going to do this. So they would just like give you all the support to get by. And then the feet there going, no, that's bullshit. Like you need to, you need to get first and you need to do absolutely excel. And so I kind of went back to my final year of university with that attitude. And yeah, that was a big moment. So I got my first job at Rolls Royce and it kind of led from there, really.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Isn't it interesting how we rise to the expectations of the people around about us?
Absolutely, yeah.
And we absorb those expectations. Fascinating.
I think you put it really eloquently there. I think we absorb the expectations of others. And, if you have got a child with dyslexia, I'm not saying you should hammer them to like in the way that Pete did me, but I was 21 years old at this point, so I'm much further through, different for children. But you just be, look, it sounds like I'm somehow blaming people for not giving me higher expectations at a younger age. That's absolutely not true. But I'm just saying we need to be careful with what we tell people they can achieve, because otherwise you might set the bar for them.
Yeah. My daughter was struggling with the concept of being a slow processor. When she got the dyslexia assessment that said slow processing at age, 16, and she's kind of like, and you could see it. And I was trying to process it for her as well. Like, what is slow processing? And we think of computer chips as having processors, like that's a slow processor or a fast processor. And then I realized through the work I was doing that actually processing is more like the gearbox in a Ferrari. You get manual Ferraris and you get automatic Ferraris. And we live in a world of automatic vehicles, automatic thinkers. But when someone with dyslexia has got a manual way of processing information, they're like a manual gearbox. They have to go through these gears, these processes much more manually than other people do. And if they're not taught to go through those gears, they get stuck in first gear, 60 miles an hour down the road in first gear, burning their engine out, wondering why they can't go faster because they know they've got a powerful engine, And I think in that moment, for her, for me as well, it's like, we don't have a slow engine. We've got a slow processing, but it's not actually slow processing, it's manual processing. And you can drive a manual Ferrari really well. In fact, if you're racing, you really want the manual. You don't want the automatic because you've got that precise control. And in a way, that's kind of what's happening with your writing, because you've got that precise control of going through the gears, small gear shifts in terms of these small sentences and so on. You've got your intentional way of going up those gears to write, and then you're a great writer, And I think shifting your expectations of yourself with your kind of worldview of how your brain works is quite significant too, how you expect to function.
Yeah. And I think, slow process, that's terrible phraseology.
It is. It's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, terminology, words matter, they shouldn't, but they do. That's just fact. One thing that really, for me, was I was coping with my dyslexia. What I realized was that, if somebody talks at a board, is talking from a board and just showing me information, like my head's all over the place. Like there's no point doing it. It's genuinely it's just pretty much a waste of my time, because I'm not going to remember anything you say. I'm not going to be able to write notes, because by the time I've written the note, you'll have been like 10 lines on already. And if I can't piece everything together, then, I can't catch up. So, I always used to laugh when they gave us like, hey, have this like typewriter to type your notes in whilst you're listening to lectures and things. I'm like, I'm kind of behind already. I learn from debate and from discussion and one-to-one, and then really understanding what the person is saying. And as I started to get a bit older and I had friends that could help me, like when I did my computing A-level, then one of our neighbours, a guy called Andrew Barnes, happened to be a computing teacher. And so purely out of the goodness of his heart, like no payment or anything like that, he he would sit down with me and we'd spend hours together going through computing work. And then I got a decent grade at my A-level computing, but I felt like I cheated. It's really hard to explain, but I genuinely felt like I cheated. Not because had somebody who did the exam for me, but because Andrew had taught me in this way. Andrew had sort of shown me and explained it and allowed me to ask questions and gone back and forth and blah, blah. And I was like, well, you're not really allowed to do that. You have to learn from this kind of weird osmosis structure of just listening to somebody and somehow it goes in and you regurgitate it. And it's like, you're not meant to have somebody actually explain things to you. That's that. And unfortunately, that model isn't scalable. And I was very fortunate to have Andrew. But when I look back on that now, I think, no, that's nonsense. Like, I understood it because Andrew had taught me in that way that I understood. And when I talk to parents about their children, I'm like, and they're saying, oh, my child's struggling. And it's like, you need to find the way that child learns. I'm really sorry as a parent. And I look at my own 3 kids and I say this to myself, I'm really sorry as a parent, but if they are struggling, you are going to have to fill that void to figure out how to teach them. And if it's hard work and takes loads of patience and you really want your kids to do well, then you're going to have to do it because the school is not going to be able to, because the school doesn't have the scale to teach in that way.
Yes.
That's all teacher down to 30 students. So that's down on the parent to sit there patiently and talk through what's going on in a way that the dyslexic child can understand and find their way of learning. And once I found my way of learning, and then YouTube existed, oh my God, it's like, the first person you don't understand, you go to the next one, and again, when I went on to do my master's, my cousin Kieran's a bit of a genius as well. Again, another Cambridge grad and all this, and he really helped me because he would do sessions with me where he would talk to me about it, and we'd do all this sort of stuff, and that's what I need,
Yeah. What did you see the ChatGPT 4.0, the Omni announcement this week?
I did not see that. No. I know they've changed Is that the one what you mean they've changed ChatGPT now to make it more flirty or something?
Well, it's not just that. Yes, it is a bit more flirty.
That's the headline, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think it's going to be transformative for dyslexia, because with Omni, first of all, you can talk to it. It talks back. Yeah, it's been doing that for a year now. But there's something powerful of having that dialogue. And then you take the camera, you point at something while you're talking to it, like your textbook or the screen on your computer or whatever. And you go, tell me about this and explain this to me, and explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. Explain it like as a picture, as a metaphor or something like that. Is it like this? Is it like that? Does that mean this? And it's giving you this kind of responsive feedback that often, we only get from people who are there as a one-to-one tutor or coach. And so something happened, I think, on Monday that we're going to see the repercussions for, in that this shift from being able to talk and interface by talking and getting an instant response, the latency is down to 250 to 300 milliseconds. So it's 1/3 of a second instant response rather than 3 or 4 or 5 second delay. It's quite remarkable what's, I think, is going to happen with dyslexic people who are like, I need that voice interface. I need that call and response. I need that specific answer to the tack I'm going down, which often we don't have round about us at hand.
Well, the trouble is it's not scalable. I mean, so education, which I find fascinating. And, I'm saying, what I need is one-to-one tuition where I mean, you can't do that for 30 children or however many. So,
no,
the only way we're going to do it is through tools like that. And I'm mildly skeptical. I mean, maybe I put too much emphasis on humans. I've seen a lot of AI, AI has obviously become a new thing, but I mean, AI has been around for, decades.
Yeah.
And, I think some of those tools can be really useful. I'm not sure they'll ever replace humans, but maybe they have to in order to be scalable. I'm kind of open-minded at the moment. I'm reserving judgment to see what the effect will be. But just to be clear, the way schools are a million miles away from what you're talking about. Schools are still like they were when I was at school.
Yes, absolutely.
The amount of time my daughter spends parrot fashioning multiplication tables is absolutely insane. I mean, if there's a skill that we don't need, it's to know off the top of our heads what 8 times 8 is.
Yes.
I mean, like, yes, you've got to understand multiplication. You've got to understand the building
Yeah.
blocks of multiplication, how multiplication works and all the importance of that. But what is this obsession with knowing what,
Yeah.
what 9 times 12 is? I mean, like,
Yeah.
and yet they
Yeah.
spend hours, like, I'm talking
Yes.
hours every single week,
Yes.
rather than doing problem solving or mental health or internet safety or like all the other things that are actually useful.
Yeah.
They sit there and they train themselves to do 45 questions in 2 minutes on multiplications every single week.
Yeah.
Parrot fashioned. We've all got a calculator in our pocket. This is insane.
It
I
is.
sit there in governors meetings and I say, hey guys, what's our AI strategy? And they say, well, what do you mean? What's our AI strategy? And I was like, well, you can ask ChatGPT. You say, like, I haven't, probably shouldn't admit this, but like my daughter had a question. She said, oh, right, I've got homework, Daddy. I need to write a report on Brazil. And I said, oh, okay, what is it? She says, I need to write 10 interesting facts about Brazil. So I was like, watch this. ChatGPT, write 10 interesting facts about Brazil. It's like, zoom, done. I was like, you can just print it off. She said, oh, it doesn't sound like me. I said, oh, sorry. ChatGPT, rewrite it as an 8-year-old. Zoom, done. Print out, send to the school. I'm like, the school wouldn't know any different because none of them have any idea what ChatGPT is or how it could affect education.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're then doing, every single week we're doing hours of spelling tests.
Yeah.
I mean, like, ChatGPT just wrote the entire thing, perfectly, grammatically, accurately, and I can't get my head around. And if I bring it up with the school, they almost laugh at me. There's like, oh, what are you talking about, Ed? Yada, yada, yada. There's like this reluctance to realize that the world is changing beneath their feet. And the way in which we're going to use technology going forward is going to be so, so much difficult. And that kid that can regurgitate the times tables will be irrelevant, absolutely irrelevant to this world.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the right kind of AI is going to solve the challenges of dyslexia and amplify its advantages. The reason I make that kind of statement is that we've now got the capability where what people with dyslexia we're struggling with is we do processes differently than other people. People process information typically in a certain way, and it's much more automatic. We tend to be much more improvisational around processes. We follow a process based on a set of principles we've got in our mind, not in a set of steps. Now it might be that we recreate that process the same way every time because the principles and the circumstances pretty much stay the same. But the moment the circumstances change, we change the process to adapt to the circumstances. And that's why we're so inventive, so creative. We're not hardwired to go through automatic thinking, to get in a rut, to just do what someone's taught us and follow that sequence and follow those taught sequences. We end up going back to first principles and recreating processes. Now, the relevance to AI, I think, is AI is a processing machine. It's all about processes. It's learned all the process of writing some text, the process of a legal process, a medical process, a diagnostic process. Just processes are hardwired into its vector database, basically. And that's, once we've got that as our right-hand companion, I see so many clients of mine who I do workplace strategy coaching with for dyslexia going to ChatGPT and saying, what's the process involved in such and such? Bang, bang, bang. Here are the steps. And oh gosh, yes, of course. I missed out step 5 and 7. I'd thought of the other 4. And it's just having that sort of feedback loop. It's like your most sensible best friend who's really academic, knows the systems, just gives you that kind of process. And then you are the adaptive one.
So I guess my view on AI and how it will be used, I agree with you. Just like, back when I was at school, there was no spell checkers. And so spelling became there was a real high commodity that it's absolutely not now. Like, despite the fact schools are still hammering spellings, even though it's an irrelevant skill because people word process, they don't write, and word process have extremely strong, spell. So once you've got the fundamentals of spelling, why would you bother learning out what there was a word that my daughter was struggling with.
Onomatopoeia or something like that?
Antiperspirant. It's like,
oh, okay.
and the school's like hammer. Okay, this is how you write antiperspirant. It's like, Doesn't matter. You don't need to know that. I think that maybe the one area where I think the limitation of AI and these tools will be is to believe that AI will somehow replace human interaction.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by that? So it will be a tool like a spell checker will be. So it'll help
Yes.
me create 10 reasons why I like Brazil. It'll help me follow processes. But where you're saying, and I might disagree with you here, but we will see where life takes us and we'll see what happens. Where it's like, actually, it will be able to interact with people who are trying to learn things and debate things and all this, because it will be able to give you a feedback circle. I'm not sure, because I think there is still something like the individual, even if it could do that, even let's just say in this world where the AI bot is so smart and so good that you can't even tell that it's an AI bot rather than a human, you will still want to talk to a human.
Of course.
You'll still want that interaction. And
Oh,
I say that
absolutely.
an
I agree.
example of that is in wealth management. So in wealth management, probably starting about 10 years ago, there was something called the robo-advice industry started. And what robo-advice was, well, actually, if you plug in all your parameters about like how much wealth you've got, what your aspirations are, what your risk tolerances are, what your blah, blah, you put it all into the computer, and the computer will then use AI to tell you, well, you should invest in this, this, and this. This is how your tax should be. And I mean, it's all just logic, and actually would give you a much more accurate answer for you personally than an individual. And all the robo-advice companies failed, despite delivering better outcomes than individual wealth managers probably would have.
Yes.
They failed. And why did they fail? Because people don't want to talk to a computer about money,
Right.
which is one of their most important commodities.
Yeah.
And I think if you're trying to learn something, you want to know that you're talking to a human in the end. So if you get a cancer diagnosis, do you want that to be done by a robot, or do you want it to be the empathy of a human that is real? There is a limitation to it, is what I'm saying. It can only take so far before you end up in that robo advice problem.
I agree. But if you think about, I suppose where I was thinking about it, and you were talking about your computer tutor, the computer neighbor who helped you and talked you through that process, and you felt like you were cheating because you were going, oh, what about this? And he was like, this is how that works, and so on. It's kind of like, if you wanted to learn to play chess, you want to play chess between you and a human, okay? But you go away and you practice against the computer to exercise that muscle, and with humans, you've got both. And I think there's going to be, I mean, I suppose I'm just talking out my own experience. There are times where I have an idea, I really want to talk to someone about it. I don't necessarily have someone to talk about it. Open up ChatGPT and I'm saying, I'm having this idea. I'm trying to connect these two things together, blah, 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 blah. You take on the adversarial role, knock it down, build it up. Give me some other opportunities, act like a lawyer on this, act like an accountant on this, act like a marketing agent on this, and give me different perspectives, because it feeds my thinking to progress further. Like, I think often people with dyslexia feed on feedback. We need that feedback loop to sort of propel us forward.
Yeah. So for me, I think it will be a tool for use like that. I haven't used it for that, for those instances. I tried to explain why ChatGPT was so important to the board of governors at the school. And I used the example, like, what makes a good chair? I said, well, let's do this. Like, what makes a good chair on a board of governors? And and I did this in front of the whole governing body. Can you imagine? That's the whole image there. Like, look, we really need an AI strategy. ChatGPT is going to take over, especially when people writing essays and stuff. We've got to think about how what should we tell parents to use it or not use it? How are we going to police it, etc. So I do this thing. What makes a good chair of the board of governors? And then ChatGPT comes back and it's like, well, the chair needs to be comfortable. It's probably needs 4 legs. And it's like, and I'm like,
you did a ChatGPT product demo and it completely flopped in front of the board.
Yeah. And everyone laughs at me and they're like, you see, it's no replacement. So, and I think there's 2 barriers. One, I think that it has a limitation in that it can't get nuance. I think that it has a limitation in the fact that humans, like the robo-advice example, where humans want to interact with humans. And so it's a useful tool to do your brainstorming exercise originally. But if I said, I don't know, let's look at one of the most successful UK companies over the last generation, something I turned down actually to invest into, which was Huel. Do you know what Huel is?
Yes,
It's like the powders that, It's like if you're really into your fitness, rather than eating a proper breakfast, just eat some dust.
Yes.
I'm like, that is a terrible idea. Like there's so many, nobody's going to want to eat dust for breakfast, lunch and dinner. That's, whatever. I'm being really mean to Huel. Huel's like one of the fastest growing companies ever in the UK. There's no AI bot that would have been able to, if you just said, hey, I'm thinking of replacing meal replacements with high protein powders that you put in a shaker. Do you think this is going to work, ChatGPT? I'm sorry, but AI is not going to tell you that.
Oh, absolutely not. I agree. So let's get back. So you did the business, you got your first, you went to Rolls Royce. What was life like at Rolls Royce? How did your dyslexia, your mind, your way of thinking show itself up in Rolls Royce?
Yeah, pretty badly. I wanted to join like my whole life had been around entrepreneurs, my mum and dad. My mum actually ran a clothing company that made jodhpurs for none of my family have ever ridden a horse or probably even been on a horse, but somehow we got involved in making horse riding wear. Who knew? So my house was full of jodhpurs and breeches and all this sort of stuff, despite the fact that none of us have ever been anywhere near a horse. It was just part of their clothing manufacturing dynasty. And yeah, so I just wanted to do like a proper corporate job to see what it was like. And like Rolls Royce was obviously Rolls Royce, it was a massive name. It's like, wow, that's so cool. And I worked in Bristol, and I just remember, this sounds really bad. I've still got friends that work at Rolls Royce today, so I'll be careful. I don't want to slag it off, but my whole life there, which lasted all of 9 months, I just remember very grey buildings, very grey people, very grey skies, and the pace was just glacial, and had been in the public sector for a bit. There was still a bit of that mentality. There's people there that were in their like 40s that had basically been at the same desk for the last 20 years, doing the same job. Again, God knows what they did all day. I generally don't know. And I just found that whole environment really hard. And the thing I found really hard was that I'd hear people say all the time, oh, that's just how it's done at Rolls Royce. That's just how Rolls Royce is. And I was doing jet engines, by the way. This isn't the car plant. This is the jet engine plant. And I just remember thinking, like, when you say this is how it's done at Rolls Royce, this is the Rolls Royce way. I mean, Rolls Royce is a company. A company is just a collection of people. What you're saying, this is how we do it, not how Rolls Royce does. Rolls Royce isn't a thing. Rolls Royce isn't, and I know I said earlier it was like an organism. It's not. It's a legal construct. The company itself is just a collection of people. So if you're using the company as an excuse for how things are, you're basically saying that's how the thing that I am part of, this collection of people I am part of, and I have chosen to be part of, is dysfunctional in certain ways. And I just hated that. I just thought, oh, and I mean, so I spent most of my time at Rolls Royce organising the annual Christmas charity fundraiser. Again, classic dyslexic. I was like, what can I do? I'm going to be the head of the annual charity fundraiser, and, with like a small gig with a few tables. And I was like, no, we're going to get the biggest hotel. We're going to get prizes. We're going to do auctions. We're going to do like, visualizing how it's all going to be and all this. I'd done a big event sort of thing in San Francisco, and so I'd sort of had a bit of experience of how you put on big charity fundraising. And then actually somebody within Rolls Royce had used some of the Rolls Royce methods around knowledge management to start a consulting firm, and that consulting firm is called Cortec. And it was like taking the way that Rolls Royce managed the corporate knowledge within Rolls Royce, like how you build a jet engine, how does that knowledge pass from one person to the next? And they were taking those techniques, and they were then trying to sell those techniques to other big engineering firms. And as soon as I heard about this, I was like, small business. And I was basically employee number one of that company. So there was a kind of a 2 or 3 guys, directors, a good friend of mine, still a good friend of mine, a guy called Paul Adler, who became the CEO. He'd been at Accenture. One of the Rolls Royce guys came over, and then I was employee number one. And so I went from a, blue chip UK, probably one of the biggest global brands in the world, to, within 9 months, a startup with zero credibility. And actually the whole thing went, when I joined, Rolls Royce were meant to be taking a stake in us, and then Rolls Royce changed the term of the deal that they were going to do. And then it ended up, Rolls Royce was no longer a partner of it. And we just ended up as a small company with, I think by the first few months, we had about probably four of us. So I've gone from a massive company of tens of thousands to like a 4-person consulting business, scratching around trying to find the next meal, as it were. And that was my journey into what being in a small business was like. And I did that for about 4 years. And at the time I didn't realize, but it was good. It was really good training to work in a small business.
What happened in those 4 years?
So we grew to about, I think, a dozen people in total, and we'd got to about £1 million in revenue. And it was quite, I wouldn't say it was super successful, but we all got paid and it was all going well. But I could quickly tell that I wasn't really sure where my career was going. I was kind of a jack of all trades. And, so Paul, who's a good friend and somebody I'm very fond of, I could tell maybe that, I don't know, just that like I wasn't sure where the direction of it was and what my role would be in that direction. I was sort of his number two and there was no really where to go. And I was walking down the South Bank with a friend of mine who I'd met in San Francisco and talking to him about what he was doing. And he said, I might think about getting into venture capital. And I was like, he was like one of the youngest partners ever at Ernst & Young. And I was like, well, what's venture capital? And he explained it to me and I was like, that's what I want to do. That sounds like a lot more fun than what I'm doing now, which is maybe not more fun. I loved my time at Cortec. I loved working with Paul. I had a great bunch of people. I just didn't. We were working with large engineering organizations, and actually, it just didn't excite me. It was basically, although we were a small business, we were working with very large businesses, and it just didn't excite me. And then the idea of venture capital really did. And so I thought, right, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to try and find a role in. And my friend, who was my university housemate, Dan, worked at Octopus. And at the time, so, Octopus, effectively, the Octopus group was less than 100 people when I joined it. So it was tiny. I mean, now it's like got thousands of employees all around the world. It was tiny. My first boss was Simon Rogerson, who's the chairman of Octopus Energy now and group CEO. And so that kind of gives you an idea. And when I joined, they said, well, look, you don't really have an investment background. You don't have a finance background. So what about going on the fundraising? So I actually did fundraising, first of all, at Octopus Ventures. So I was basically on the phones calling people. So I went from talking to sort of boards of FTSE 250 companies, trying to sell them consulting projects, to like ringing people up and trying to get them to invest in our products, proper sales, like proper sales. And I actually think should be a bit like national service, that everyone should do sales for a bit. Just to see how hard it is. Yeah, yes. I don't think sales teams get enough credit. The skill of selling is so tough, and the perseverance and resilience. And I did that for about 1.5 years at Octopus. But the amazing thing about Octopus is that it's a place where dyslexics can actually thrive, because they actively encourage people to challenge process. So, I came in and I was like, oh, that's not how I'd organize the sales teams. That's not how I'd organize the data. What about thinking about doing it this way and that way, and like spreading out the people here and doing it there and trying to do these initiatives or that initiatives? And, again, we're going back 15 years now. So it's a weird to think about it now, because the company was such a different place. But like Simon loved it. He was like, somebody's coming in here, shaking things up, coming up with new ways of doing things. And it was absolutely down his alley. And so, I worked really hard as well. And one thing that gets lost, by the way, in this whole dyslexia conversation and debate of like, oh, how do you learn? And, how do you get through this? And this. The truth is, if you're dyslexic, the only real way you're going to get through is if you work a lot harder than everybody else. Yeah. Like there is going to be, I know some people have disagreed. I've done other things where people have disagreed with me, but for me, the probably thing that sets me apart is I've just worked my tail off, and just came in, worked really hard. And then after about a year, so about 1.5 years, 2 years, there was a glimmer of an opportunity to get on the investment side of the business. A chap called Mario Berti gave me my first, I'd got rejected a few times from various teams. Ironically, oh God, they're going to kill me for saying this, but ironically, I got rejected from the ventures team originally. They told me I wasn't unique enough. Oh. So, which is good, because in a way, I'd spent my entire life being told how weird I was and how unusual I was. So somebody told me I wasn't that unique. I was actually quite pleased with that. They're just to be clear, they're lovely people, and I still rib them for it now. But Mario was in a slightly different team, and he did give me my first little inkling into the investment world as an administrator. As literally, I'd gone from talking to FTSE 250 boards all the way through to doing sales roles, and then doing filing, filing minutes and organizing the thing. And so I worked up from administrator all the way to partner of the month.
Wow. Over those 15 years, administrator to partner.
Well, actually, it's even more squiggly than that, because I worked my way from administrator to director. And then I decided I wanted to invest in a different asset class. I was actually doing a lot in renewable energy. And I was like, actually, I never got into this job to be into renewable energy. As much as I love renewable energy and I love all the assets we did and it was good times, I wanted to invest in entrepreneurs rather than lumps of metal. And so I got to director level in the renewable energy team. And then I decided I would take 2 steps backwards, became an investment manager again in small companies, and then worked my way back up. And 10 years, literally 10, was it 10? No, maybe, 10 years after I'd applied to be first in Octopus Ventures, I got my Octopus Ventures email address. So it's just, and again, it's just like the next best thing, isn't it? I think that's what dyslexics are good at doing. They're like, if it doesn't work, it's fine. I'll just do the next best thing and I'll incrementally get to where I need to be. I'll get to the ladder I need to be on.
Yes. And I think it's fascinating that you're willing to make that kind of sacrifice in that, you do the 2 steps back in order to redirect and get to a better destination. What were you actually doing during that period of time, say the last 10 years? What do you find you're doing in once you got to that kind of, okay, I'd be fascinated to see. So there was all these processes you started to do early on in Octopus. What do you think the biggest abilities and unique characteristics that you were bringing to the table that were emerging during that period? What do you find that you're giving the most in terms of contributing to the work and so on? There was the filing. I don't imagine you were terribly great at filing, but I don't know. Often
not terrible. It's just like,
yeah,
it feels very dull to me. That's probably the main thing. Yeah.
So what was it that you find that is kind of coming out of you that is, the thing that is your kind of unique abilities that are sort of have emerged over that period of time?
I think hard work, just, probably drummed into me by parents or whatever. And also knowing that I have to work hard to overcome other failings, I would say. But the real thing that I think my super skill is, so like, just to be clear, my colleagues that I work with now are much traditionally brighter than me. I accept that. Like, their brains work quickly, their ability to do, financial sums and to kind of remember facts and get things right. My boss, Richard, who's a, good friend as well, they're so clever. It's really clever. So I can't necessarily compete in the just being naturally clever kind of way that people do. But what I think I'm good at and sets me apart is I can visualize what might happen next, or how we might shape the team in certain ways, or how we might set things up in certain ways. So for example, there was, I'll give you an example, not from what I'm doing right now, but like back when I was doing renewable energy, we had this situation where we'd raised a lot of money to invest in renewable energy. And then the government changed the way in which the tariffs for renewable energy, in particular solar, were going to be given out. So there's a complete change. And it completely messed up our business model. And they said, so we needed to find more sites of a certain size, of a certain way to be able to invest into. And we didn't have any. And so they just set me the task of, can you go and find sites? And so straight away, I'm like, okay, right, we need to build a sales team to go out to the farmers and to the landowners and the property owners to put solar panels on their roofs and the et cetera, et cetera. And this is how the process is going to look. This is what the sales team will be doing. These are the and I've already, within 10 minutes, I've kind of visualized how the setup of this is going to work and what we need to do in order to start making it work. And for a long time, I didn't realize that was a particular skill. And I think now that's becoming more apparent to me, that where my skill lies is really in thinking through what things could become in the future and how they could look and how they could be set up. And the turning point for me of understanding that was probably in my master's. I've told this story before, and I'm not sure it resonates, but I'll try it on you. So I was doing my master's, and I worked really hard, way harder than I did for my undergraduate, to get my master's. And there was so many clever, smart people in my class, and that was all good. But then towards the end, we did this project called a petacucha, which is where you had to think about something I think it's something that motivates you. That was it. Something that inspires you or something that motivates you. You had to come up with a presentation as a petacucha, which is 20 slides, and each slide is shown for 20 seconds. So 20 slides, 20 seconds, and you put one image per slide. and then you tell your story over however many minutes it is, so, and the slides rotate automatically. So you cannot stay on a slide. Picture goes up, 20 seconds, moves on to the next one, 20 seconds, moves on to the next one. Topic is something that motivates you. And I, sat down, got PowerPoint up, thought about what I was going to do, knocked out 20 slides. Half an hour later, I go back to the tutor and be like, right, okay, what's the next part of this? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, no, it's just like, no, this is a task for the day. But I've already immediately, and whenever I tell this to other dyslexics, I can see what's going on in their head. They're like, what would I do? What's my 20 slides? What would my pictures be? How would it be organized? And how would it flow through? This is perfect for us, isn't it? It's perfect for the way that our minds work, because we're not having to think about words or sentences. We just need 20 pictures, and we just need a topic, and we can build it. And if I said it to you now, like what motivates you? I mean, like, try it. You'll probably go, I'll hand it to you.
Oh boy, what motivates me? 20 seconds, 20 slides. Wow. That's teaching people, helping people have aha moments, those kind of, oh, wow. And so what would my pictures be? That would take me a bit longer to figure out. I'm going to give it back to you. Because this is fascinating. So you've completed that project super quick compared to all your peers. Whereas you're used to completing projects super slow, much harder work to get it done, work hard. And there you just did something that just came straight to you. 20 pictures, 20 seconds on each, 6.5 minutes. I've told you what motivates me. Done.
Yeah. And it's like, and those sorts of projects, we've got this problem over here. We need to do this. We need to build an origination strategy, or we need to build a new investment process. We need to think about the way in which we're helping portfolio companies add value to their sales teams, or things like that. Those sorts of tasks I just get hold of, and I just start to brainstorm and and think, try and gather information from other people. I think I've got much better now at listening to others and adding them. Part of the problem with doing it is that I get quite focused on what I think is the right solution, and I don't listen to others. I've got much better now at actually realizing other people's ideas can nicely fit into what I'm thinking. So another example is, like, I'm a bit like you. I love working with young people. I really like trying to work with people that don't necessarily have the opportunity to do some of the stuff that I've done. And so I run a week's work experience here at Octopus Ventures, which is open to children between the ages of 16 and 18. And, it was like, hey, Ed, I know somebody said, I know you're into this kind of young people. We should do something with work experience. I mean, the light goes off in my head. Okay, this is what the week's going to look. Here's the entrepreneurs that we're going to get in to talk to. These are the projects that those children are going to do. This is how we're going to go and find these people at school. This is how we're going to bring them in. It's what we're going to give them, what we're not going to give them. And, we've run that project now for 4 or 5 years. We're in our 5th year of doing it. We run through like 12 plus students every year from inner city London schools that come in, talk to some amazing entrepreneurs, learn about venture capital. And a lot of the feedback's insanely insane. So I'm really proud of it, because it's changing. I've had young people say, like, one of the best weeks of their lives, because a lot of them have never been in an office. I mean, if you're 17-year-old from an inner city London school that's maybe not got exposure to kind of offices, and you come in here, it's like all of a sudden they come in really nervous on day 1, and by day 5 they're all friends and they're all bouncing around off the walls, and it's just amazing. But again, it's like, what am I good at? I'm good at taking that, we should do something with work experience, through to creating a program of work and putting it all together and executing on it. That's where that's where I feel. Now, if you said, Ed, can you analyze all of those numbers in that spreadsheet for me and organize them into graphs? I mean, A, I think it was really boring, and B, I'd probably make errors, and C, there are just so many better people around at Octopus than I am to do that.
Or can you write that into a convincing business plan that we can hand to somebody independently of you? You're kind of like, I imagine you would say, no, I'll just go speak to them and they'll get it within about 20 minutes. It'll be sorted.
Yeah, I'd probably, I mean, I've had to learn to do it, like to write investment papers, to write investment notes. You can't make a partner if you've not gone through all the stages. I've just been, again, I'm fortunate to be at Octopus in that Octopus is a culture whereby if you work hard and you try and that you try and learn and you try and improve. I've had some really good managers through the years, people like, my first manager, John Thorpe, and when I was an investor, who took the time to actually explain to me how things should be. And I've mentioned like Tim as well, who really brought my writing on, Grant, who was really, he was very kind of understanding about my dyslexia. He said something to me once, which is like, Ed, you really need to double check all of your emails. And I was like, Grant, I've looked through my emails probably 10 times. I don't spot the mistake. And, from that moment on, he understood what I was good at, and he understood, and then my boss, Richard, who I've had now for 6 or 7 years, who again, I think has been really good at being patient with me, but also using me for what he knows I'm good at, and not, not getting fixated on the things that I'm not. And you need a company culture that allows for that.
Yeah.
Just to talk about the company culture here. When I wrote that blog about being dyslexia and my journey with dyslexia, Simon Rogerson, the CEO, he then since it's the entire company. I was like, oh my God, Simon, what have you done? And just being like, I love this level of vulnerability. I love the fact that he's put himself out there. And I won. They have an award called the Grand Tentacle, and I won the Grand Tentacle for having been vulnerable enough to have written that blog. And then that ended up creating we now have our neurodiversity group at Octopus, which is sort of 40, 50 people who get together as a group who are from, maybe ADHD, ASD, dyslexia. And we talk about that. And we've made, in fact, there's a poster on the wall about our dyslexia group, which you can't see. And not all organizations allow people to be themselves and to be that vulnerable. And whereas with Octopus, that was the case. So I was fortunate.
Again, you were fortunate because you also, you planted a seed and that seed grew. And I think there's something that's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And you put up a post about the Dyslexic Edge, this book that you were interviewed for. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's quite random. So Jamie, who wrote the book, who's a very successful entrepreneur in his own right, reached out to me because I think he had either heard me on another dyslexia podcast, or he'd read my blog that I put together about being the dyslexic investor, which was titled. And as an entrepreneur, he was interested in the early stage investing world, because he was like, oh, everybody I speak to is an entrepreneur. I've never talked to anybody on the other side of the coin that's the investor in the entrepreneur who's dyslexic. Yes. So I think he wanted to get the perspective of a dyslexic looking at entrepreneurs and how that looked like, because it's a lot more unusual. There aren't many dyslexic partners in VC firms.
Yes.
I mean, there actually, it's without getting on a rant, like 80% of all VC partners are actually either privately educated or went to grammar schools. It's like 70+% went to private education, which is like 6.5% of the population. So there is a very quintessential what a VC partner looks like. And yes, I definitely don't, as a dyslexic state educated person, I definitely don't fit into that box. And I think Jamie and Much was just like, wow, that's quite unusual. That seems a bit odd. Let's see what makes him tick, and let's see what his thoughts on what did dyslexia give me that enabled me to do that job and to get to the position I'm in. I like the way that Jamie's phrased it as the dyslexic edge.
Yeah.
That, often dyslexia is framed as some sort of superpower. And I have a real issue with this. I know there's the debate. There's a big debate that seems to be, I don't really participate in it, but there seems to be a big debate within the dyslexic community where some people think it's a superpower and some people think it's a disability. And it's like, and people want to frame it almost as one or the other. Disability so you get the help, superpower so it doesn't become, and I'm just like, well, I'm not sure either are true. I think that we're good at some things that other people aren't good at on average, and we're not so good, and all dyslexics are different. And I like this idea of the edges that dyslexia gives you, the dyslexic edge, what does that mean? But it has to also be coupled with the disadvantages. And I do struggle with this idea that you're telling a 9-year-old who's getting the worst grades in the class, don't worry, you've got a superpower. It's like, what I'd really like to be able to do is spell biscuit right now. I don't.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for that superpower that's doing me absolutely no good whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I don't think it is. I think that's the wrong way of looking at it personally. I just think we learn differently. We have a different edge to us in terms of
Yeah.
what gives us edges in certain ways, but also means that other things aren't so good.
Have you read the book Dyslexic Advantage at all or listened to it?
It's on the shelf somewhere.
Yeah,
I
so many
I
people.
bought it.
Yeah. Well, what you described, your ability, they call material reasoning. They've got four mind strengths they call material reasoning. Oh, I forget them all. MIND, narrative reasoning, dynamic reasoning. Anyway, material reasoning and dynamic reasoning, it's this ability to predict the future or predict a process accurately that often people try and learn to do, but often people with dyslexia just intuitively have. They can often have three-dimensional, really good understanding of a process, and yet two-dimensionally, they could be terrible. And so it's this interesting small nuances that I think compound. I think the reality in life is that people have small advantages that if they repeat and repeat and repeat, end up looking like a superpower. But actually, it's not a superpower. It's just one small advantage that they have repeated and practiced and developed. And the compound effect has turned it into something, a really powerful skill and ability. But that isn't we often think of superpowers of just happening or being there latently and then just being unveiled. But this dyslexic edge is much more realistic. It's much more true to the actual reality of it on the inside.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like the narrative of it, and I think it's also getting in order for the edge to come true. In order for me to be able to set up work experience or whatever it might be, I have to make sure that I can cope with all the disadvantage as well. Like I have to find the coping mechanisms that allow me to. So maybe that means working harder by writing more, looking over emails more closely, or having other people help me look at some of the written work to me. So I often say with a lot of things is that you need to nail the core before you do all the periphery. If the core isn't there, you're just going to come unstuck. You've got to nail that. And for a dyslexic, when the core relies so much on things that you struggle with, then you have to find the coping mechanisms as well. So solidify the core, and then the rest of it then can make you shine. That's where you can get your edge from.
This dyslexic edge, I'm just going to love this. I can't wait till the book comes out. I hope it lives up to the title of its name.
It's got some amazing people. It's got some incredible people that Jamie's managed to get to be there. It was like, what? I feel completely out of my depth as being part of it, but I'll take it. My ego is like sky high. I was like,
brilliant,
greatly, but I'll take it.
Chapter beside Richard Branson.
Well, I think he's doing the forward, but I'll take Kelly Hoppen and Theopathesis, Duncan Vanaheim, and the Black Farmer and all this. I'm like, so goodness knows what he was thinking when he asked me, but I would absolutely take it. It's done my ego the world of good.
Fantastic. So
I know what everybody's getting for Christmas this year.
Yes. Final question, I suppose, maybe. If you've got a dyslexic edge, what tools do you use to keep it sharp? What sort of tools do you tend to use in your toolbox that are go-tos for you, like tech or notebooks, software? Well, what sort of things do you find you use a lot that really help you?
Good question. So I'm intellectually curious. I'm not sure that's a dyslexic thing, but I struggle with reading, and audiobooks and podcasts have been like a revelation for me. And also I'm busy. So, but like every time I go for a walk to the bus stop, I'm doing the washing up, or you can listen to audiobooks. So if you're like, I'm somebody who's dyslexic and I struggle to, read or find the time to read, or just I don't find it pleasurable, like I probably listen to 2 books a month and, hours of podcasts. So that really helps me keep my edge. I think in other things, not tools necessarily, there's not like one specific tool that I use that does give me the edge, other than like using Google search to make sure that I've spelled words right, which I probably do 1,000 times a day. But I think one thing that I always need, and I've recognized that I need, is that if I'm just doing the job, that will only last my mental health so well. Because my brain needs to create. It needs to create new ideas, new processes. I mean, being a VC is amazing for this because obviously I deal with so many different companies from so many different sectors. You're just learning all the time and problem solving all the time. But I need like projects, I need goals to try and achieve where the road hasn't been defined that I need to produce something that keeps me interested and keeps me excited. And now I think it's taken me a long time. I mean, we haven't really talked a lot about like my own relationship with dyslexia, which has been a roller coaster its own. For a long time, I hated the idea of being dyslexic, and I sort of wondered whether dyslexia was even a thing or whether it was just an excuse for me being not so bright. And then I was like, well, am I really dyslexic or not dyslexic or whatever? And it took me until I did my master's, really about the age of 35 to actually go, no, I am definitely dyslexic. It really is a thing. And, I'm going to own it now. But that has then led me on to understanding what I'm good at and what the edge that dyslexia gives me, and not just all the stuff that makes me struggle. And so I need to practice that edge. I need to put my energy there. Otherwise my confidence goes down.
Where did you do your master's?
I started business school at Oxford University. So yeah, my mum's always like, I would love to take those teachers that put you in the remedial huts, the dilapidated remedial huts back at primary school when you were 7. I lecture at Oxford University quite often now, and mum was just like, it blows her mind. She was, she's not a particularly emotional woman, but I can see when I send her, when I talk to her about it, she, for her, it's just phenomenal. It's like to think she took that 7-year-old boy who was not going to pass any exams, was not going to get into, was absolutely explicitly told, like university wouldn't be a route and all the rest of it. And she's like, I just wish I could show them a video of you lecturing at Oxford University where you got your master's from.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, mothers are often the hero in a dyslexia journey, so often mothers spend so much time, fighting quietly, dealing with the system, dealing with all the roadblocks that are put in place, the paperwork that's required, the meetings to go to, the chasing up, the following up. There's just so much to do. And I know there's mothers listening to this right now that will be thinking, that's going to be my son in the future, and I'm going to keep fighting.
Yeah, I hope so. And I should and my dad is amazing as well. I've got 2 wonderful parents,
Yes.
different in every way, but both
Yes.
wonderful.
Well, yes, and that's interesting because I find, fathers in this, I think as a father of a dyslexic child, I've seen my wife take on that sort of school-facing role. And then my wife got cancer and I had to sort of step up and, she's over it now, thank goodness, but I had to step up at that moment. And in a way, that sort of put me in a world where I'm like, oh my goodness. And I was bewildered in many ways because I've got dyslexia and I don't like the edge. I didn't have a great school experience, etc., even though I did, reasonably well like you did. I think sometimes I wonder what it is. Sometimes it's hard. I don't know. I think about this sort of mother-father dynamic and school and dyslexia and those early stages. And sometimes there's this tension between, no, we've got to trust them to do their professional work. And then there's this instinctual feeling often within the mum, which is like, no, this isn't quite right. We've got to do something about this sooner rather than later. And then the dynamics in it all are quite intense within a family dynamic.
And they'll be unique to every school, and they'll be unique to every family, and humans love to put everybody in boxes and love to put things in boxes. And the truth is that it will change depending on who's in charge, and I do think technology will change it as well. So I've invested in a company called Talamo. I don't know if you know Jamie Wace. He's built a dyslexia screening tool which can do screening en masse within schools. And obviously I invested because I was just interested in this. But it's getting massive traction. Schools care about this stuff in a way that they never did before.
Yes.
And by using technology, using AI to do the screening and to get an early indication, not formal diagnosis, but at least schools being able to identify, okay, well, who has different learning styles and what are they? And maybe they do, there is a high risk of dyslexia in this child, or high chance of identifying dyslexia in this child. Therefore, we need to think about that. But we can do that now at scale with Talamo. That is, that will change the way in which hopefully schools think about these things. And it won't just be, well, that kid's a bit slow and can't do spelling, so we'll put them in the remedial huts. Let's hope so. I mean, it hasn't changed in 30 years, but I'm heavily an optimist. So maybe the 35th year is when it will finally change.
This podcast is sponsored by dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com, which helps you organize yourself creatively with a productivity system for Apple devices.
I love the positivity of podcasts like this that are really talking about the dyslexia edge and things. But there are, I do remember especially through academia, but also when I started a job, there was a number of there was an instance tattooed on my brain, which really, even now, hit my confidence slowly. Like when I joined, and again, I don't know if I'm going to get sued for saying this or it's being recorded, but when I joined Rolls Royce, within the first week, I was on some sort of management course, because we were on a management graduate course, and sort of a very well-meaning kind of HR person was sort of saying, look, you need to really understand the employees that you've got to work with and who you're going to, and if you've got a dyslexic, don't give them a computer, give them a hammer. And I was, I didn't have the confidence to put my hand up and be like, what if I'm the dyslexic? It's but immediately what that says to me is I must not let anyone know I'm dyslexic.
Mm-hmm.
I must not make this clear. And so what I'm going to do is hide it as best as I can. So rather than lean into it, like I've done much more in my later career, in my early career, it was all about that. And whenever when I did the milk round, what they call the milk round when you go for graduate jobs, whenever I did those, and now and again I'd mention I was dyslexic, and I would never get called back for an interview if I mentioned I was dyslexic. I was determined to work at Accenture, and that was going to be the job that I was going to get at Accenture. So what I wanted is that. And I remember you got into the assessment day and they gave you 6 pages to read and then write a presentation on. And they've given us half an hour to do it. And I'm like, 6 pages? I'm like, I can't read 6 pages in half an hour, let alone then build a presentation. Do you know what I mean? So again, you're thinking, well, don't mention you're dyslexic. This is clearly not a world for that. And just little instances like that, they do, obviously I'm regurgitating them now 20 years later. So obviously somewhere deep in my psyche, there's that chip on my shoulder that says, I can knock that chip off most of the time. But it's still there, the you shouldn't belong here because of those differences.
What do they mean by don't give them a computer, give them a hammer? I don't understand that.
I don't either, because my wife will tell you the last person to have a hammer should be me. I mean, anything around the house, you want a shelf put up, that's Marty, not me. You want anything practical doing, definitely give that to her. Because it's the what happens is people hear, oh, dyslexics are creative. I'm not an artist. My sister's an artist, an incredible artist. She's not dyslexic. She's an artist, but not dyslexic. And they hear, oh, they must be academically thick. So what do you do if they need to do something practical? And I'm like, I am creative, but not creative in the way that I can create a shelving unit or I can, build an engine of a car. I'm creative in the way that I can problem solve, in the way that I can think through the next thing. But, people I think what happens is, and the lady that said this is probably very well-meaning and doesn't mean to be offensive, although clearly it's pretty offensive. And I think what she's done is taken the stereotype, or what she believes to be the stereotype, and she's tried to fit it into the right box.
Yes.
And it's I assumed when I started my job, I do a lot with legal contracts, that I would be terrible at, and I do it to myself, I'd be terrible at going through legal documents and find that really difficult. But what's really weird with a legal document is that actually they're often quite creative, and there's kind of a problem to solve within the document. You have to think about the way the clauses could be written. You have to problem solve the way that the legal wording is put together to make sense, and it covers every eventuality. So you have to have that forward thought.
Yes.
And how the definitions all fit together. And weirdly, I quite enjoy looking at legal documents.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to pigeonhole a dyslexia, you probably first say, oh, don't give them any legal documents. Don't do that because they're words. They'll be terrible at that. And it's well, actually, I'm pretty good at reviewing legal documents.
Yes.
I often see And so there are a lot of instances with dyslexics where, unfortunately, the stereotype dyslexic ends up informing people's judgment of what you can and what you can't do, which will often be quite different.
Yes. Well, I've got a law degree, and I read legal contracts every once in a while, and I love the problem solving that's involved in that, because there has to be a clarity, there has to be a focus, that things have to build on one another, and you really are projecting into the future. Scenario planning, this multiple scenario planning, is so well fitted to someone who likes predicting, projecting, and a process of getting to a destination, and risk mitigation, etc.
I always say that legal contracts are divorce agreements, not marriage agreements, and you have to So if you think about them in that way, it's like if you because
it's a prenup. It's a prenup.
Yeah, it's a prenup. If everything's going well, no one ever looks at a contract, do they? They only ever look at the contract when things are going badly, and then the contract's been written 3 years ago by somebody else or whatever, and the interpretation of that contract can be completely different to what it was meant to be. So I think it's hard to explain to people that don't work in legal contracts and stuff, but there is actually something really interesting and problem solving about a legal document.
Yes.
And again, my own bias about being dyslexic would have said, don't give me any legal work, I won't be able to do it because I'm dyslexic. Even though the reality is, over time, I've realized it's something I'm quite good at.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there was one story I might have mentioned that, I decided that hit me quite hard when I started my degree, that again, I wanted to prove myself as being able to do stuff without dyslexia. I was in a bookshop buying books, textbooks, and the person in front of me a gentleman was in front of me. I don't know how old he was, an older gentleman, let's say, and the girl at the bookstore, who was just young server behind the counter, he asked for a certain book, and he gave a complicated title to the book, and she said, "I'm really sorry, I'm dyslexic. Could you write down the title so that I can make sure that I get it right as I put it to the computer?" And he just turned to her and said, "Well, what if you're dyslexic? What would you be doing working in a bookshop?"
Oh.
And I didn't know what to do with that, because I actually did confront him, just because I'm that sort of person that I don't really, I don't like unfairness, or real issue with people being unfair and rude. It's just like, just drilled in. So I did confront him and said, "Look, I'm dyslexic, and it's just completely ignorant, and, it's out of order. It's just mean." She went off in floods of tears. Another server had to come in to deal with them, etc. And so I wasn't going to let it lie. But the truth is, and it's horrible for me to admit this now, I left that bookshop thinking, it's probably got a point. It's probably got a point somewhere. Maybe we don't belong doing certain types of jobs. And, that's scalding for me to say now. And I feel sorry, to myself for thinking it. But, it was his problem. But that made me go, I'm not going to be dyslexic at university. When I start university, I'm not going to be dyslexic. I'm not going to get extra time. I'm not going to ask for computers. I'm not going to do all the things that you do to get the extra support. And it was because of that man that made me question my legitimacy for moving on through education as dyslexic. So that was a big moment. And it was like, the Pete on Ocean Beach incident, where he's like said, no, go for a first. You do your hardest. I then went back in my final year and went, no, I am going to go for the extra time. I am going to get the support. I'm going to get the computers, and to hell with the guy over here. The cleverest person I've ever met in my life is telling me that, dyslexia is just a thing. It's not a definition of who you are. So, like that then enabled me to embrace it again.
Wow. What was the backstory to prompt you to say, right, I'm going to write this blog? Because that probably didn't just happen all by itself. There's probably a little story behind that that says, right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write this down. Why did you write the blog then?
Probably therapy, like self-therapy. I don't know. Well, what happened is that my son was born, and he was at my graduation for my master's. And so I posted a picture of me, my dad, and my son, Fergus. And under it, I said, "Just got my master's from Oxford University, not bad for a dyslexic." That's all I posted. And I got all these comments saying, "Wow, that's really inspiring. Didn't know you were dyslexic. My my son or my daughter's dyslexic, and this like really has helped me, give me hope. And like the post went, it went crazy. I was like, oh, it was just an excuse to put my kid up because, I'm a proud dad, and, you love your kids and you just want to boast about them, really. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe because that's got such a reaction, I'll write a blog. And I thought, oh, the title Dyslexic Investor sounds quite interesting. And so I came up with the title and I thought, shit, I better write something now. And I thought I'll just write my story. And I genuinely did it in an hour. It took me about an hour to write it down. I did it on the train into work. And it's great, I wouldn't have met Jamie and been in the Dyslexic book. I wouldn't have been in the Invisible Gift podcast with Andrew Kilty. I'd never have met you. So it's had this snowball effect. And I don't know if I don't know where that journey takes me. I'm not sure that will I ever lean in any further, or will this be the kind of where I stand? I don't know. Who knows?
Fantastic. Final words. What are your final thoughts?
No, thank you for the conversation. Sorry, I've rambled so much.
No,
I did warn
this
you.
has been,
I did warn you.
This has not been rambling. This has been, dropping one insight after another. It's fantastic. Thank you so much.
I just finished because I think something you said, mothers, fathers, parents, just generally play such a key role, and we've talked about it at length within this podcast. And it's interesting, when I first put my blog out about being the dyslexic investor and all this sort of thing, when you're 7 to 9 years old, 10, 11 years old, you don't think about these things. It has to come from the parents. And so the reaction I got, I said, if anyone's dyslexic, feel free to reach out and let's talk about it. But I didn't get that. What I got was the parents of dyslexic children who reached out and I spoke to, and a lot of them were very emotional about it because they didn't see a pathway for their children. And then they read the blog and they were like, wow, maybe there is a pathway. Maybe I've missed it. Maybe there is a pathway. And so I've now really, when I think about the advice I give, I hone that advice at the parent more than the actual dyslexic child themselves. And in the first thing, and I say, well, all the lessons that we've gone through is like, A, focus what they're good at. B, keep encouraging them to be the absolute best they can be. Don't allow it to be a limitation. C, find out their way of working. Find out how they learn and keep hammering that until you've done it. And don't give up that traditional methods don't work, so there aren't others. Focus on what they're really good at. Don't focus on everything they're bad at, and because they will have the edges that we've talked about that will actually in this world stand them in much better stead. They're the skills that we need. We don't need to know what 6 times 8 is. We need to understand who can problem solve and who can come up with new processes and procedures, who can solve some of the world's biggest problems. There's a real role for them. And just because they're failing every spelling test at school is not some form of life sentence that's going to matter. So, my last words, I guess, are that trying to give the parents the confidence to keep going and to keep working with their child to put the right things in place, because just like for my mum, it will pay dividends in the end. It's going to be a bit of an emotional roller coaster probably getting there.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we do this podcast each week, is just to hear a person's story from beginning to end and just see how they've kind of navigated it like a river hitting blocks. It just flows around the side. You end up through an apprenticeship scheme that rises you up, and then you end up in this, and there's so many, rather than going down the road more traveled, we often go down the road less traveled, that like a stream going down a river, a mountain.
Yeah. And who knows where that leads is what I'd say as well. I'm a big believer in not following your dreams. I'm a big believer in like taking the blinkers off and seeing what the opportunities are around you and seeing what interests you and not being too one-dimensional is what I'd also say. I don't have it. If Mario Berti hadn't given me the opportunity to be the administrator in the investment teams, I'd have probably left and taken over my dad's business. And then God knows what would have happened with that. We don't have the counterfactual, but it'd been all right. It would have been all right. I'm sure of it.
Yeah. Yes.
You know what I mean? Or it might not have been, and then I'd had to do something else. Who knows?
And you'd have figured out what the next best thing is, and you'd have worked hard, you'd have grafted, you'd have pulled people together, and you'd have achieved something with that.
I just realized, by the way, I've stolen a line from Frozen 2. So
Oh
I don't
yeah,
know
what's that?
have you ever watched Frozen 2?
Yes.
You know, the Disney movie in Frozen 2, where Anna's like, this is, you can tell I've got young girls. And yeah, Anna's locked in a cave and she doesn't know what to do about it. And I think the little snowman turns around to her and says, well, you just do the next best thing. Or maybe it's the troll, one or the other. And
Okay.
actually, I think it's a really powerful message for people and for kids. It's like,
Yes.
when it doesn't feel like there's any solution, just try and bring it back to the next best thing.
Ed, it's been fantastic. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
See you next time. I'll stop there. That was great. Thank you very much.
This podcast is sponsored by DyslexiaProductivityCoaching.com. It's my day job when I'm not hosting this podcast. Tell me, do you know what you want to achieve in the workplace, but you're struggling with how to achieve it? Maybe you suspect some traits of dyslexia are getting in the way. Well, that's where Dyslexia Productivity Coaching comes in, because we give you a simple productivity system for your Apple devices that harnesses the creativity that comes with your dyslexia. It includes proven methods like note-taking, reminders, speech-to-text, mind mapping, and more, all tailored to your needs. It'll free up your time and help you achieve outstanding results. Book a complimentary call to discuss it with me, and if you do it soon, I may also be available to coach you personally via Zoom. So don't be shy, go to dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com or swipe up and book it now.